Hello everyone, and welcome to Module 7. This week we're going to talk about the Middle East or Southwest Asia and North Africa. What I'd like to begin with is to give a little view or overview of the region and how religion relates to the spaces that we find there. I want to start by looking at your impressions of this world region. Now, as you can see, there's a bit of a more negative connotation with this part of the world than we've seen in the impressions of other world regions so far. We see war, terrorism as dominant themes, poverty, but overall, people tend to have a rather negative impression of this region. So it's important that you watch the video that's on the news page, which gives you an interview with a really important thinker on the Middle East and the idea of self and other more generally, Edward Said and his work on Orientalism. And keep that in mind as we think about what are our impressions that we bring to this part of the world. So one of the things that I want to talk about in relation to this part of the world is religion. We haven't really discussed the dominant religion in other parts of the world that we've talked about so far because since we're teaching this course from the context of the United States, many of us have some exposure to Christianity and the basic tenets of Christianity, which is the sort of dominant religion in the US, Europe, and Latin America. But since we're now going to be talking about part of the world that has a different major religion, I want to just give a very, very broad brushed overview of some of the major tenets and practices of Islam. Of course, this does not do justice to the religion. As you know, there are many different ways that folks practice it, and many different scholars and theologians that devote their life to this religion, but we're just going to do a really quick, broad brush overview. So one of the ways that we can begin looking at this is think about similarities to religions you may have more familiarity with. So there's a lot of similarities between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They're all really based from a much older religion called Zoroastrianism, which is one of the first monotheistic religions, and they all draw a lot of their major beliefs from this early religion that was focused in what is modern-day Iran or Persia. They all, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, have monotheism, a belief in only one God. They also believe that that God created the world and all of the people that live in it. They believe in the idea of human choice or human self-determination, and that human self then has an individual soul that is to submit to God's will. And then they all also believe in a day of judgment where God then judges people on the choices that they've made in their life. These three religions share a lot of the same stories in their holy books. You'll see across the Torah, which is the Jewish holy book, the Old Testament of Christianity, and the Quran, stories of the children of Abraham. You'll see stories of the Garden of Eden, sort of similar tales throughout these books. And then in Islam and Christianity, both of those religions understand Jesus as being someone who comes from God. Christians see him as the Son of God and Messiah, but Muslims see him as someone who also comes from God, but not as of the large importance that Christianity places on Jesus. With Islam and Christianity, you have a similarity that they're both proselytizing religions, or both religions are interested in trying to convert other people to their religion. So you can see that where that might be a point of tension as they're both trying to convert followers to their way of thinking. Islam began as a religion around 600 CE, and if you haven't seen the term CE before, it stands for current era. It's a less Christian specific way of thinking about time, whereas folks use before Christ and after Christ, or BC and AD. Current era is supposed to be refers to the same sort of period of time, but non-denominationally. At that point, Muhammad was a man who was revealed the Word of God, which became the holy book of the Quran, which is the major tenet of Islamic faith. The core beliefs of Islam focus on 5 pillars. These 5 pillars are the recognition of Allah as the one God and Muhammad as his prophet, prayer 5 times a day, and if you have any interaction with Islamic culture, this is often a very prominent thing that folks see. The daily prayer you will hear in Islamic cities, the call to prayer coming from the mosque. Charity, so folks are to give at least 2.5% of one's wealth to charitable organizations or the less fortunate. Fasting during the holy month of Ramadan, and then once in one's lifetime, Muslims are to make a pilgrimage or a Hajj to the holy city of Mecca. And I've included a video on the course website, a link to the video that looks at what that Hajj process is like. And within that Hajj journey, you see again some of the repetition of stories that you may have heard associated with Christianity and Judaism. If we look at the geographic spread of the folks that practice Islam, we see that over 1 billion people in the world are Muslims. The real focus of that is in Southwest Asia and North Africa, so the countries in the darkest blue where you have 50% or more of the population as Muslims. The next lighter blue color, you have 25 to 50%, so in places like India, Ethiopia, Democratic Republic of Congo, Tanzania. And then the lighter blue, you have 2 to 25% of the population, so in China, Mongolia, Kazakhstan. Actually, the largest country in terms of population of Muslims is Indonesia in Southeast Asia. So there are Muslims throughout the world, but Southwest Asia and North Africa tend to have really high percentages of the population. As all religions, there's a lot of diversity in terms of how Islam is practiced. So we can look at a major division within Islam is the split between the Sunni and the Shiite. And this split is built around the question of who should have authority in Islamic communities and what should be the religious dimensions of political leadership. So how much religion and politics should be sort of intertwined. For the Sunni, succession of power is thought to go down through a sort of set of clergy. So similar to the Catholic Church, you have a clergy as power within the community. And these supporters are known as the Sunni, and they're the sort of orthodox of the Muslim faith. For the Shiites, the idea is that succession of power should be passed down through Muhammad, the Prophet's family. So their supporters are known as Shiite Ali, or partisans of Ali, and then they think that political leadership should be run through a hereditary line from Muhammad's family. There's also a lot of cultural variations in Islam. Mystical forms such as Sufism in Algeria, you might have seen folks practicing the whirling dervishes. Those are a Sufi practice, Druze practice in Lebanon, and then various practices in Southeast Asia, in Indonesia, Malaysia, that have picked up some of the indigenous religions there and sort of blended together into new ways to practice. So if we look at the geographical results of the Sunni-Shia split, we see that most Muslims are Sunni, about 73% of the region, and that's the lighter green color here. The Shiites mainly live in Iran and Iraq, so you see the dark green color through a lot of Iran and the southeast corner of Iraq. A couple sort of spatterings of folks in Afghanistan, Turkey, Syria as well. There are other religions within the area, obviously different sects of Christianity, such as the Coptic Christians in Egypt, Judaism, particularly in Israel, and things like Baha'ism and Zoroastrianism still in the area as well. if we look at gender relations in Islamic culture, we see, again, as we saw in Latin America and as we know from living in the United States, patriarchy is a dominant frame of mind in a lot of ways. The patriarchy, again, is this idea that women should be subordinate to men, and this exists in a lot of Islamic culture. In some places, there is segregation of education, so women are limited in their access to education in some places, in their access to jobs or what types of jobs that they do, and also in their access to public space. But in a lot of places, women's roles are changing. For example, in Iran, there's more women in college than men. In places like Sudan, Saudi Arabia, there's more women in high-level careers, and then more women also entering the sort of political front in a lot of different places. If we look at a map that shows some of these gender relations, we see the areas that have the purple dots as places where seclusion of women is accepted among some ethnic groups. So you see that focused around the Persian Gulf, also in Morocco and Tunisia. Places that have compulsory government-mandated dress codes for women, those are the places that you see the orange dots. So Sudan, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. But this varies a lot, and we'll talk about that a little bit here in a second. Places with the red dots have a tax on women for immodest dress, so Algeria, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Kuwait. And in places with the yellow dots, women need permission from male relatives or guardians to get a passport or travel abroad. So that's fairly widespread. But you see places like Turkey, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon as having none of these sorts of prohibitions. So really, again, it sort of varies by country. We can think of places like Saudi Arabia where women aren't allowed to drive cars or ride bicycles versus in Iran where women are taxi drivers. One of the things that really stands out to Western people who encounter Islamic culture is women's dress. And we can look to the Quran for a passage that gives this notion that's been interpreted of how women should dress. So from the Quran, we can read, "O Prophet, tell your wives and daughters and the women of the faithful to draw their wraps a little over them. They will thus be recognized and no harm will come to them." So this has been interpreted in a lot of different ways, and it sort of is one of the things that has affected this notion of gender in public and private space for women. So women are to sort of shield themselves from men who are strangers. They're able to be sort of uncovered when they're around men that are within their family, but when they're around strangers, they're to be covered. And the practice of wrapping oneself sort of creates a distinction between public and private space. They're sort of creating a space where around themselves where they can go out into public without having to be revealed to strange men. So this has been taken up in different ways. We can see the hijab in the bottom right corner has a headscarf or veil, and this is sort of the typical wear in places like Iran. And then we have more conservative interpretations. We see the chadar on the top left, or the burqa, where you have the full body garment that totally shields women from any sort of view from the outside. And Western women often see this as a type of confinement, but many, there's obviously different feelings about it from Muslim women, but many of them see it as a sense of freeing themselves from the male gaze. Another way that Islam is taken up is this notion of Islamism. This can be understood as a fundamentalism where folks advocate for conservative adherence to their creed, more literal interpretation of the Quran, and focus on a political movement that challenges the encroachment of global popular culture, especially U.S. culture, that blames a lot of the regional problems of the area on colonial and Western influences and wants to merge civil and religious authority.